But then something remarkable happens, and that is they start to succeed in actually conquering chunks of land. They conquer part of northern France. They will conquer England twice. They do it, lose it, and get it back. Right? The first time they capture it is under Canute the Great, and then the second time they capture it is under William the Conqueror. But one of the things that happens to the Vikings as they're conquering, by the way, they invented Russia. The Vikings invented Russia. The word Russia is a Viking word. It's from Rus, R-U-S. And what had happened was the Rus were a Viking tribe that had gotten hired by what are today Ukrainian lords, to create order in the area. The Rus show up, they beat everybody up, they create order, right? And then they realize, why are we submitting to these Ukrainians? We're taking over. And the next thing you know, the Rus are ruling Ukraine, the original Russia, and before you know it, they create Russia. And now today, Ukraine wants nothing to do with Russia. The irony is too weird. A group of these Vikings end up in Barbados, which you know today is Saragossa. It's in Spain. It's on the Ebro River. It's in northern Spain. And the Vikings took it from the Arabs. When the Vikings conquered northern France, they dumped their Viking languages and switched over to French. When the Vikings did the Rus thing, they dumped that and they switched over to Russian, right? Because the peasants were too uneducable. You couldn't teach them Swedish. So you just learned their language. It was easier. Well, when they end up in northern Spain capturing this Muslim town from the Muslims, the next thing you know, the Vikings are dressed like Muslims, they're talking like Muslims, they're adopting Muslim society, and eventually they get it in their head, why stop here, let's keep going, and they go, and in 1050 they conquer Sicily. Hrothgar, the Viking, Hrothgar, the Norman, you know him as Roger the First. He conquers Sicily. They decide, because the Muslims owned Sicily, Arabic was the dominant language in Sicily at the time, they decide to adopt Arabic ways. The coins that are minted by the descendants of Hrothgar, by the descendants of Roger I, right up until Henry VI, there were a few Sicilian kings. The coins on one side have Latin, on the other side have Arabic. So these guys are Catholic Vikings ruling Arabic Sicily, which, by the way, was a multi-ethnic place to begin with. There were Greeks, and there were Phoenicians, and there were Romans, and then the Arabs came, and they sort of mingled with them. Now there's Vikings running around Sicily, and just adding another weird nation into the mix. And the Vikings, by the way, start marrying into German royal families, and the next thing you know, there's like, Sicily is basically ruled by these Germans who are mixed Viking and mixed German, and it's very complicated. In the mix, this guy comes about. His name is Frederick the Second, not the Great. That's a different guy. Frederick the Second. Friedrich the Second. Friedrich spoke Latin, French, Sicilian. It was 6 languages, Arabic and 2 other languages. He read Arabic texts. He conducted scientific experiments because he had learned from Arabic. He had learned from the Arabic text he was reading the scientific method. He embraced this Arab civilization, and he began advancing it. By the way, this is the 13th century. He wrote his own scientific treatise on falconry. He appears twice in the book. He had himself painted, and he puts himself twice in his own book. He wrote it in Latin, just for the record. But the guy that he cites the most, the biggest source, is an Arabic thinker. Friedrich II is so intent on being this guy that's between the 2 civilizations, between this Arab civilization and this Christian civilization, that not only does he continue the policies of tolerance towards Arabs that his predecessors had, he actually will take on the Pope in Rome himself. And he got excommunicated, I think it was 3 times. He ends up as the Holy Roman Emperor, so he owned basically everything from southern Denmark to Sicily. Just this huge swath of land right through the middle of Europe. Now owned in a loose sense because the Holy Roman Empire, which he's the leader of, was really more of a confederacy, but he's also the king of Sicily. In other words, through most of history, when the East and the West clashed together, the people at the center knew that both sides were just part of the same civilization, especially when they were in the Mediterranean. When the Greek philosopher and historian Hecataeus made his first atlas, he said there are 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and Libya. Asia was today what the Middle East is, including India, by the way. He included India in that. Libya is just Africa. That was the Greek name for Africa. And then Europe was approximately what Europe is today. He didn't see those as 3 dividing lines that separated the 3. He himself was from Asia, according to the way he defined it. He was actually born in the Persian Empire. He was ethnically Greek, but born in the Persian Empire. He didn't see that as a contradiction. There was nothing weird about that. That was just how things were. He saw Europe, Asia, and Libya as regions within a whole. Today, we see Africa, Europe, and Asia as 3 separate, distinct places with, there might as well be a 1,000-foot tall wall dividing them. And there are European countries that now wish there was, as people are pouring in. Well, of course, the people are pouring in because of the wars the United States and Europe has waged in the Middle East, destabilizing the whole area. And now the Europeans are like, whoa, 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 what are you coming here for? And they're like, well, because you blew up my house. Yeah, it'd be great if you stayed over there. The Mediterranean was always a highway. It was never a divider. It didn't separate. But what happened was we started to get into the mindset that there was this separation, and Europe really pushed, Christian Europe really pushed for the separation. And of course, no single event did this more than the Crusades. Because at the moment that the Crusades happened, Christian Europe made it clear to the rest of the West that there was no way to reconcile, that the division was too great, that Christian Europe was willing to do anything and everything it could to take Jerusalem back, including just absolute cruel depravities in the Crusades, right? They would slaughter whole populations. They went on these rape fests. At one point, they captured Salahuddin's sister, and they raped her to death for no other reason than just to antagonize him. Of course, they'll pay because he kicks their ass afterwards. But, right, that recalcitrant division is the division that we're facing today. So first of all, if you've ever meditated or done yoga, right, you know that there's been an infusion of Indian culture or Buddhist culture into the United States. That the boundary between the two is already fuzzy at that point. That if you ever travel to any part of Asia, people walk around with cell phones. That is to say that the exchange goes both directions. But when you look at the difference between, say, Turkey and Italy, or Persia and Spain, that division is even thinner. So first of all, this idea that there's an East is absurd, because you're gonna lump Vietnam with India, with Japan, with China. These are shockingly different cultures from each other. Now, obviously, Japan and China have had a lot of cultural exchange back and forth, but Japan and India have not. In other words, this idea that there's this Asia with this monolithic culture doesn't make any sense, not to mention that there's no similarity between Japan and Syria. Although Persians love Japanese movies, Akira Kurosawa movies. Like, I think The Seventh Samurai might be one of Persia's favorite ever movies, but that's clearly not the same thing as they should be lumped in the same category. By the way, just for the record, Akira Kurosawa is one of the greatest all-time filmmakers, period. And if you don't know who he is, you really need to look him up. I think he was involved in the making of like 130 films, including Star Wars, it turns out. He said no to Star Wars. Oh, really? So Steven Spielberg, not Spielberg, George Lucas stole the idea of Star Wars from Akira Kurosawa. What was it Hidden Fortress? Does anybody remember? Anyway, totally look it up and then go watch the Akira Kurosawa movie. There's even a C-3PO and an R2-D2 in it. There's this short guy and this tall guy, and the dialogue is almost identical. Yeah, it's really weird. My point is that by doing this, by insisting that there's this division, we make the division. The division becomes true. This notion that there's a Western civilization is absurd, right? Pulp paper comes from China. The stirrup comes from India. Steel comes from India. The Arabs invented algebra. Do you see what I mean? Like this notion that somehow our civilizations are separated and they don't interact with each other doesn't make any geographical or historical sense. Now, it is true some civilizations are closer to each other than others. Like Greece and Turkey are obviously very close to each other because the Turks owned the Greeks for so long. But even when you go further out, it becomes a little bit on the absurd side. And so I guess at the end of the day, what I would say to you is there is no such thing specifically as Western civilization, but I think you could make an argument that there was such a thing as Mediterranean civilization. I think you could make an argument that there was such a thing as Indian civilization or Chinese civilization. Does that make sense? So that it's not an East-West thing. It's that throughout Africa and Asia and Europe, there are these clusters of civilizations that are similar to each other that have interacted with each other more than, say, their next-door neighbors. Like, obviously, India and China and India and Persia have interacted with each other, but it's not like they're one cultural region. There's clearly a distinction there. Anyway, I hope at least gave you some food for thought. I'll field some questions and let's call it a day. I'm not feeling good. I'm pretty sure I've got bubonic plague. Is that no joke? What's happening in Madagascar? Crap. That's a really hard question. I mean, I think Rashomon is just so brilliantly made. It's hard to not pick it as one of my favorites. It's either that or Seven Samurai. I also like Kagashima, but I don't think it's as good a movie by any means. And then Ran. Ran is cinematographically one of the best movies ever made. It's just gorgeous. I'd put it with Blade Runner. The original one and the new one. I was blown away by the new one.